silence is one of the most underrated yet powerful traits you woman can embody. In a world where people are constantly talking, posting, explaining, and defending themselves, the woman who chooses silence stands out, not as someone who has nothing to say, but as someone who doesn't feel the need to say everything. For her, silence is not weakness, it's a form of self-respect. It's a signal that she values her peace, her time, and her presence enough not to waste it on what doesn't serve her. She knows that not every comment requires a reply, not every insult deserves an answer, and not every invitation to chaos needs to be accepted. Val, you woman doesn't explain her worth, she lives it. She doesn't beg to be understood, because she knows that those meant for her will naturally understand her. When she's met with disrespect, she doesn't argue or try to prove herself, she quietly removes herself. That silence speaks louder than any comeback ever could. And in that silence there is dignity, there is restraint, there is control. This doesn't mean she is passive. It means she chooses her battles wisely and uses her silence as a shield, not as a prison. Silence also gives her the upper hand in emotionally charged situations. While others might react instantly and impulsively, she pauses. That pause alone can shift the energy in a room. People lean in, wondering what she's thinking, what she might say next, if anything. But that's the thing, she's not performing for anyone. Her silence isn't a strategy to manipulate. It's a reflection of her inner calm and discipline. When she does speak, people listen not because she raises her voice, but because her words are rare and intentional. Her silence gives her speech more weight. In relationships, this ability to remain quiet instead of over-explaining, over-apologizing, or over-giving keeps her grounded in her power. She doesn't chase validation. If a man pulls away, she doesn't flood him with messages or try to win him back with words. She lets him feel the absence of her presence. She understands that silence can create a powerful mirror. It reflects a person's behavior back at them. When someone mistreats her and she goes silent, they are left to sit with their own actions without her interference, without her justifications, without her emotional labor softening the blow. Her silence says, I am not available for disrespect, and it says it with clarity that words often fail to deliver. This ability to choose silence is a byproduct of emotional maturity. It's not easy. It takes practice. It takes strength to sit with discomfort and not immediately react, but that's what sets her apart. She has trained herself not to respond to everything. She understands that silence gives her space to think, to heal, and to stay aligned with her values. It prevents her from being dragged into unnecessary arguments or conversations that drain her. She doesn't waste her breath trying to be right in the eyes of someone committed to misunderstanding her. What's more, silence enhances her presence. It creates mystery. While others are busy oversharing or trying to impress, she remains rooted in her essence. She knows that when she walks into a room, it's not her words that make the first impact, it's her energy, her calmness, her ability to be at peace with herself. People can sense that. They may not be able to explain it, but they feel it, and they are drawn to it. Silence creates that pull. It draws people in without her having to push. Val, you women don't use silence as a punishment, but as a filter. If someone can't handle the absence of her attention, they were never meant to be close to her in the first place. She knows her silence will either confuse people or captivate them, and either result is revealing. If someone is genuinely interested in understanding her, they will lean in. If they were only there for her reaction, they will drift away. Silence exposes what words often hide, and in her moments alone, silence becomes her sanctuary. She uses it to reconnect with herself, to reflect, to realign. She doesn't need constant noise to feel alive. She doesn't fear being alone with her thoughts. In fact, she thrives in that space. It's where she gains clarity, where she builds her resilience, where she reminds herself of her standards, her goals, her dreams. The world might be loud, chaotic, and demanding, but within her there is stillness, and that stillness is her power. Ultimately, the power of silence isn't about withholding. It's about choosing when to speak, choosing when to engage, choosing herself above the need to be understood by everyone. And that choice, made over and over again, is what elevates her. It's what protects her energy. It's what reinforces her value, not just to others, but to herself. Because the woman who honors her silence commands more respect than the one who fills every silence out of fear. And the one who doesn't chase after validation finds herself pursued by peace. Mystery is magnetic. It draws people in, captures attention, and holds space in their mind long after the moment has passed. Val, you woman understands this. She knows the power of restraint, not just in speech, but in how much of herself she reveals to the world. She isn't hiding, she's choosing, and what she chooses is to let people earn access to the deeper parts of who she is. In doing so, she creates an air of mystery and intrigue that makes her unforgettable. In a world that encourages constant sharing, the woman who doesn't reveal everything becomes rare. Everyone is online talking about what they're doing, what they're thinking, and how they're feeling every second of the day. But she isn't like everyone else. She doesn't feel the need to be loud about her life. She doesn't post every move, explain every emotion, or narrate her entire journey to gain attention. She moves in silence, and because of that, she stands out. She becomes someone others want to know more about, someone whose presence leaves a mark, not because she demands it, but because she holds just enough to make people lean in. This mystery isn't a game, it's not manipulation, it's presence. You woman doesn't create mystery to confuse. She creates it by being rooted in her own sense of self. She's not trying to impress or perform. She simply doesn't need to prove anything. Her confidence is quiet. Her elegance is subtle. She doesn't announce her value. She embodies it, and people can feel that. There's something about her that lingers even in silence. In dating, this energy is especially powerful. While some women may feel the urge to overshare early on to build connection or seem relatable, you woman takes her time. She reveals herself layer by layer, allowing the connection to grow naturally. Not because she's trying to be elusive, but because she knows her worth isn't something to be handed over freely. She doesn't rush into explaining her past, her trauma, or her plans for the future to someone she barely knows. She understands that the more people know, the more they feel entitled to have opinions, to judge, to access parts of her that they haven't earned. So she waits, she observes. She lets others reveal themselves while she remains anchored in her energy. And in doing so, she creates a powerful dynamic. People begin to crave her presence, her voice, her thoughts because she isn't constantly offering them. Her silence builds interest. Her mystery makes others realize that knowing her is a privilege, not a right. And that realization creates respect. In friendships and even in professional environments, this mystery still applies. Val, you woman doesn't walk into a room trying to be the center of attention. She doesn't dominate conversations or try to prove her intelligence, her experience, or her capabilities. She simply allows her work, her energy, and her demeanor to speak for her, and often that silent confidence speaks louder than any introduction could. People notice her, not because she's loud, but because she's deeply present and completely unbothered by the need for approval. Mystery gives her the upper hand in communication. It keeps people wondering, not in a confusing way, but in a compelling one. It allows her to control the narrative of her life. When she chooses to speak, it's intentional. When she shares, it's meaningful. Because of that, her words carry more weight. People pay attention, not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. They want to know her thoughts, her feelings, her perspective, because she doesn't give them away to just anyone. There is also a kind of safety in this mystery. By not constantly revealing every detail of her life, she protects her emotional space. She gives herself room to grow, to heal, and to evolve without the pressure of outside opinions. She doesn't expose her vulnerabilities to people who haven't earned her trust. And that's not cold, it's wise. It shows discernment. It shows that she honors herself enough to be selective about who gets to know her story. This doesn't mean she's distant or closed off. In fact, she can be warm, kind, and deeply engaging. But that warmth is balanced with boundaries. She knows that just because someone is curious doesn't mean they are worthy. So she allows people to experience her light, but not everyone gets to see her depth. That distinction is what keeps her powerful. And in this intentional withholding, there is space for others to feel, reflect, and pursue. People begin to notice how much they think about her, how often her silence lingers in their mind. That's the effect of mystery. It leaves room for imagination. It makes people work a little harder, listen a little closer, and appreciate a little deeper. Because when something isn't given easily, it's valued more. Mystery, when used by a high-value woman, becomes a quiet yet compelling invitation. It says, there is more to me, but only if you're patient enough to see it. In that patience, that ability to allow someone to unfold over time is rare. It's powerful. It's magnetic. And it's one of the many reasons why you women don't chase, they attract, because what is mysterious stays on people's minds. And when a woman can be both present and just out of reach, she becomes unforgettable. In a world where people are constantly talking over one another to be heard, the you woman does something radical. She listens. She listens with intention, with presence, and with calm. She doesn't interrupt to prove a point, nor does she feel the need to speak just to fill the silence. She understands that power doesn't always come from what is said, but often from what is observed and felt in silence. Listening to her isn't just a courtesy, it's a form of wisdom. It's a way of understanding the world more deeply and connecting more authentically. The high-value woman knows that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the most confident. Often, it's the most insecure one trying to mask fear with noise. She doesn't need to compete with that. She understands the power of restraint, the beauty of stillness, and the strength it takes to remain centered when others are reactive. While others are preparing their next point mid-conversation, she is tuned in. She watches how people speak, the pauses they take, the tone they use. She hears what's being said, but also what's being avoided. And in doing so, she gains a level of insight that those focused only on talking often miss. This ability to listen instead of always speaking gives her emotional control. When confronted or challenged, she doesn't immediately react. She pauses, not because she's unsure, but because she's grounded. That pause can be powerful. It shifts the energy, creates space, and often makes the other person reflect on their own behavior. People aren't used to being met with silence. They're used to defensiveness, arguments, or emotional outbursts. But the high-value woman doesn't need to defend herself every time. Her silence says, I heard you, and I'm deciding if this even deserves a response. And that decision is key. She doesn't give away her emotional energy just because someone demands it. She decides where her words are best spent. Her listening is a filter. It helps her understand who she's dealing with, whether this person respects her boundaries, and whether this conversation aligns with her values. Sometimes the most powerful move is to stay quiet, to hold space, and to choose dignity over dominance. Because while others are focused on being right, she's focused on staying in alignment with herself. Listening also deepens her relationships. Whether romantic, platonic, or professional, people feel safe around her. They feel seen because she's not just hearing their words, she's receiving their energy. She pays attention to details, remembers the small things, and makes people feel valued without needing to constantly center herself. That kind of presence is rare. It's the kind that people remember long after the conversation ends. It creates connection, trust, and influence, all without forcing anything, and yet, despite this calm exterior, she's not a doormat. She is deeply aware. Her silence doesn't mean she tolerates disrespect. It means she's watching, evaluating, deciding. She lets others reveal who they are, and then she chooses how to respond. Sometimes that response is a boundary. Sometimes it's distance. Sometimes it's complete disengagement. And all of that begins with the simple, quiet act of listening. The high-value woman isn't afraid of silence in conversations. She welcomes it. She understands that silence creates space for real thought, for meaningful reflection. It invites others to slow down, to consider their words more carefully. It raises the quality of communication. She isn't trying to rush to conclusions or to outtalk the other person. Her presence alone creates a sense of calm, and that calm becomes contagious. In a heated discussion, she can bring everything back to stillness not by force, but by energy. This kind of presence is magnetic. People don't just hear her, they feel her. When she finally speaks, her words land with weight. They carry more impact because they come from a place of intention, not reaction. She's not speaking just to be heard. She's speaking because what she has to say matters. That distinction is what makes people listen. That's what makes her words influential, not just audible. In romantic relationships, this quality becomes even more valuable. While others might be quick to argue, to defend, or to lecture, she listens. And in that listening, she learns more about her partner, what they fear, what they need, and even what they may not have the courage to say directly. Her silence creates a safe space, and that space invites depth. It invites honesty. It invites growth. But she also knows that if someone uses her calmness as an excuse to dominate or manipulate, she won't stay silent for long. She'll walk away, and her silence will say more in that moment than any long explanation ever could. In friendships and work dynamics, she brings this same grounded presence. She doesn't compete to be the loudest voice in the room. She lets others speak, and when she finally contributes, it's thoughtful, it's clear, it's concise. And because she listens, her words often address the heart of the issue, cutting through noise and confusion. People respect her not just for her intelligence, but for her discernment, for her ability to know when to speak and when not to. Ultimately, the power of a high-value woman lies not in how much she says, but in how deeply she understands. Her silence is never empty. It's full of observation, clarity, and wisdom. And in a world that often rewards the loud, she reminds us that true influence comes from stillness. There's something undeniably powerful about a woman who doesn't react out of desperation, a woman who doesn't beg, plead, or over-explain when she's disrespected. Instead, she gets quiet, not because she's weak, but because she's stepping back to reclaim her power. That silence, calm, intentional, and unwavering, can shift everything. High-value women use silence not to manipulate, but to protect their dignity, to regain control, and to remind the world that their energy is not a commodity. It's a privilege when a high-value woman is mistreated, whether by a partner, a friend, or a colleague. She doesn't retaliate emotionally. She doesn't rush to prove her point or force someone to understand her worth. She already knows her value, and that self-knowledge allows her to walk away without creating noise. Her silence in those moments is her greatest statement. It says, "I will not participate in anything that diminishes me." And because she doesn't explain or chase, the weight of her absence is felt even more deeply. This kind of silence isn't passive. It's purposeful. It creates space for the other person to reflect, to feel the gap, to understand that something has shifted. And in many cases, that silence echoes louder than any words could. People expect reactions. They expect drama. But when none comes, they're left alone with their choices. That discomfort can be far more transformative than any argument. It's in that silent void where people often realize what they've lost, not because she tried to convince them, but because she didn't. A high-value woman doesn't view silence as a punishment. She sees it as a boundary. It's the invisible line between what she will tolerate and what she won't. And she doesn't cross that line for anyone. She doesn't chase closure. She doesn't demand apologies. Her silence is closure. Her absence is the answer. She lets people feel the consequences of taking her for granted. Because when she goes quiet, it's not to manipulate. It's to move on. This detachment is rooted in emotional maturity. It takes strength not to react, especially when emotions are high, but the high-value woman has trained herself to pause. She doesn't let anger or fear pull her out of alignment. Instead, she takes a breath, assesses the situation, and often chooses silence. That moment of stillness allows her to act from wisdom, not wounds, and that alone puts her in control. Even when she's hurt, she doesn't give away her power through emotional outbursts. She knows that her peace is sacred, and she protects it fiercely. If someone pushes her beyond her boundaries, she doesn't scream. She disappears. And that silence says more than any emotional reaction ever could. It says, "You no longer have access to me," and she means it. What's even more powerful is that this silence often makes people question themselves. Not because she wanted them to feel guilty or chase her, but because true self-respect creates a mirror. And when someone sees that kind of unwavering confidence and emotional discipline, they're forced to reflect on their own behavior. They realize that they've lost someone who won't beg to be seen, who won't fight to be heard, and who won't stay where she isn't valued. In romantic relationships, this is especially true. When a high-value woman is met with emotional neglect, inconsistency, or manipulation, she doesn't engage in endless conversations trying to fix what clearly isn't working. She doesn't try to explain basic decency to someone who already knows what they're doing. She removes herself. Her silence becomes her protection. She knows that staying silent can often speak volumes, especially when the other person expects chaos, drama, or desperation. Instead, she leaves with grace and lets her absence deliver the final message. And if that silence is misunderstood, if someone interprets her calm withdrawal as cold or arrogant, that's fine. She's not here to be understood by everyone. She's not trying to control how others perceive her. She's trying to stay true to herself, and sometimes that truth means walking away without a final word, without a dramatic exit, without a scene. Just silence. There's also an inner peace that comes with this approach. She doesn't carry the weight of trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed. She doesn't waste time over-explaining her boundaries to those who keep crossing them. She lets her silence filter people out. The ones who truly respect her will feel that silence and respond with growth. The ones who don't were never meant to stay. Either way, she wins because she stayed in her power. It's important to understand that this kind of silence isn't coldness. It's clarity, it's emotional discipline, it's a refusal to be dragged into chaos just because someone else hasn't learned how to self-regulate. And in that refusal, she sets a new standard for herself and for everyone around her. She teaches people how to treat her not through demands or ultimatums, but through action. Through absence, through the calm removal of her energy. The high, Val, you woman knows she doesn't have to scream to be heard or fight to be respected. Sometimes the most powerful thing she can do is say nothing at all, and let that silence speak on her behalf. There's a unique kind of grace in a woman who doesn't rush to explain herself, who doesn't overcompensate, overtalk, or overpromise just to be liked or understood. A high Val, you woman moves with a quiet certainty that allows her to stay rooted in who she is, even when others question her. She doesn't feel the need to make everyone comfortable or clarify every detail of her choices. Instead, she allows silence to fill the spaces where others might feel pressured to speak. And in that silence, she builds trust in herself. This inner trust shows up in subtle yet powerful ways. When she makes a decision, she doesn't second, guess it just because someone disagrees. She listens, she considers, but ultimately, she returns to her own truth. And that speaks volumes. Others may not always understand her path, but they can feel her conviction. She's not looking for validation because she already carries it within. Her silence in moments of doubt or criticism becomes a reflection of that deep, unwavering self-trust. So many people spend their lives explaining why they said what they said, why they did what they did, why they chose a different path. But the high Val, you woman doesn't live for external approval. She knows that not everyone will get it. Not everyone is meant to, and rather than trying to convince others, she focuses her energy inward. She chooses her peace over permission, her quiet over chaos, her truth over being liked. This doesn't mean she's arrogant or dismissive. It means she's free from the constant pull to justify her feelings, her needs, her growth. She doesn't send long messages trying to be understood by someone who's already shown they aren't listening. She doesn't try to force connections or explain her worth. She lets her presence do the work. She knows that people who truly see her won't need paragraphs of explanation. They'll feel it, they'll know. In moments of misunderstanding, she gives space instead of overreaction. If someone misjudges her, she doesn't scramble to fix their perception. She understands that people project their own limitations onto others, and she refuses to shrink just to fit into their idea of who she should be. She doesn't argue with those who have already decided who they think she is. She simply continues on her path with grace, with clarity, and with silence where it's needed. This silence becomes an anchor in conflict. Where others might be quick to defend themselves or correct every assumption, she chooses discernment. She asks herself, does this even require my energy? And if the answer is no, she moves on. Not everything needs a reaction. Not every situation deserves access to her voice. Her silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It shows she knows the value of her words and the power of choosing when to use them. Even in relationships, this trust in silence holds its place. If someone pulls away or creates distance, she doesn't chase. She doesn't panic. She knows that love doesn't require begging. She knows that alignment doesn't need to be forced. She steps back and lets things unfold. If a relationship is meant for her, it will stand in her stillness. If it's not, she'll let it fall away without needing to plead for closure. Her silence becomes a boundary and also a form of self-respect. And when it comes to personal goals and achievements, she moves with quiet consistency. She doesn't broadcast her plans before they've taken shape. She doesn't need to tell everyone what she's doing or how hard she's working. She simply shows up, does the work, and lets the results speak. While others may seek applause at every milestone, she finds satisfaction in knowing she's building something real, even if no one's watching yet. Her silence is her strategy, and her confidence is her fuel. This relationship with silence ultimately helps her hear herself more clearly. In stillness, she reconnects with her intuition. She listens not to respond, but to understand, especially when it comes to herself. She reflects without needing constant noise. She grows without needing to perform, and because of this, she becomes deeply self-aware. She notices what drains her and what nourishes her. She sees when it's time to act and when it's time to rest. That clarity comes not from constant talking, but from intentional listening to her body, her spirit, her instincts. The high Val, you woman doesn't use silence to distance herself from the world. She uses it to stay aligned with her purpose, to protect her energy, to remain in control of her narrative. She knows that her voice matters, but so does her decision to withhold it at times. She doesn't need to explain every boundary or defend every move. Her life, the way she lives it, is enough of an explanation. In this kind of quiet power, there is freedom. Freedom from needing to be everything to everyone. Freedom from seeking constant reassurance. Freedom from the pressure to always be seen and heard, to feel validated. She gives herself permission to speak only when it matters, and in doing so, her voice becomes even more impactful. When she does speak, people listen. Not because she's the loudest, but because she's the most intentional. Hi, Val. You woman knows the world will always have opinions, questions, and judgments, but instead of drowning in the noise, she turns inward. She trusts her silence, her stillness, and the strength of being rooted in her truth. And that trust allows her to move through life with elegance, certainty, and grace without needing to say a single word, more than necessary